Today's interview is brought to you by Psychotoxin Press, www.psychotoxin.com. I don't care what your flavor of horror in, whether it be novellas, short stories, or full-length novels, they have it, with thousands of selections to choose from, all written by indie authors. And also, great news! Use this promo code HorrorRealm10 and you'll get 10% off in your first order. And make sure to tell them that the Horror Realm sent you. Go down that link in that subscription box, click on it, put in that promo code HorrorRealm10. Check it out. Psychotoxin Press. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce, and today we're doing another Women of Indie Horror Spotlight. Today I have with us, she's an author. She has a new book out right now. It's called They Are Cursed Like You. Trailer Park Witches, Book 1. You can see it right there. I have with us today Holly Cornetto. Holly, welcome to the Horror Room.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm flattered and happy to be here.
Pleasure to meet you. So tell everyone a little bit about They Are Cursed Like You.
So I grew up in Alabama, and you may be able to tell from the accent.
Yes.
I wanted to write a book that was set in Alabama, and I wanted to write a witchy book. When I was young, the movie The Craft, I don't know if you know the movie.
Yes.
Okay, that came out when I was a little bit too young to watch it, but I watched it anyway, as one does, and it really stuck with me. I think in part because we all have one of those experiences where we read something maybe when we're a little too young for it, or experience something, but these female characters, they really intrigued me. The idea of witchcraft really intrigued me, and it caused me to kind of dabble in that realm in my teenage years. Like, I would go out into the woods and pretend I was a witch and casting spells even before I knew what any of that was. So for this book, I kind of was revisiting my love for that movie and that setting, but in my childhood home of Alabama. So that's kind of, I guess, where the initial seeds for this book came from, like where they were born.
Amazing. So how long did it take you to come up with and write this book?
I think the drafting and the editing process of the book took maybe a little over a year to complete. So this book is co-written with a friend of mine, Simone Green, and it was Simone had approached me and said, hey, I like your writing, I've read a few of your things, would you be interested in working on something together? And I said, yeah, I'd love to, because I'd read some of Simone's stuff and I was a fan of theirs as well. And so Simone said, well, what ideas do you have? And I started throwing out some ideas, and I said Trailer Park Witches, and Simone's like, that one. So working with a co-author is amazing, as long as your co-author is amazing, and Simone was, and it really kept me on my toes. And I think that I was able to draft this together. We were able to draft it a little faster than writing something individually, because Simone would write a chapter and then send it to me, and I would read it, and I would be so inspired and so just excited about the project. I'm like, oh, it's my turn, kind of. And I would jump on that enthusiasm, because I think writing can be such a lonely process sometimes.
Imagine.
When you get to share that with someone, the magic of building a story, and you're both passionate about it, we would hit each other up and be like, hey, what do you think about this character doing this? Or what do you think about having this happen in the past? And it was a great experience, and it built up organically and faster, I think, because we were working together on a project that we were both really, really excited about.
It's amazing. And witchcraft and witches is something that's very popular. By the way, a lot of people don't know my mother was into witchcraft. God rest her soul. But she was big into witchcraft and black magic, and yeah, and some other half of the family, my father's side of the family, didn't approve of that, So
Right.
yeah, but because they were super religious. But yes,
Yeah.
definitely something that I grew up with. And
That's really cool, because I think there's a lot there you because witches come in a lot of different forms. Like, you get your Wiccans who do the new age kind of stuff with crystals and different magics. But you also have like your pagans, who are more old school. And then you get your midwives, like historically. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned, your mom, because there's just a big tradition of witchcraft, and I think that it gets um anywhere that you have a powerful woman, right? Or a woman who does something that she's not necessarily supposed to do according to society. Or anytime you have a woman who has knowledge that, it's not necessarily historically associated with being a woman. I think that's where you find people who embrace that label of witch. So
I
kudos
agree.
to your mom. And I'm glad to hear you say that with pride, that my
Yes.
mom was a witch. That's amazing
A
because you
lot of
got the
people don't
biggest
know that.
smile on
Only
your face.
a lot of people don't know that, but people who are close to me know the story. I remember like even growing up, like my dad's parents, my grandparents, like we couldn't bring our toys over to their house because they were afraid that we were bringing something with us. So, and I
I
didn't
get
find out that until I was an adult. I didn't find out that until I was an adult why I couldn't bring my toys to my grandparents' house.
That's interesting because I think because growing up when I did, I was in Alabama in like, the late 80s, the early to mid 90s. That's when I was kind of coming of age myself. And you had the whole satanic panic thing
Mhm.
going on where I lived. And so I think it was a similar thing because like part of my rebellion, because my family was very fundamentalist, like Southern Baptist, religious,
Same
all
here.
kinds of, yeah. And so I think for me, like some of my rebellions as a teenager was doing things like going out in the woods and practicing witchcraft or listening to bands like Marilyn Manson or stuff like that I knew like my parents wouldn't necessarily approve of.
Mhm.
But I got kind of that same thing, where they associated it more, I think, with like devil worship. But I
Yeah.
mean, it wasn't that clearly, but
Yeah.
that's because that was kind of the zeitgeist of that moment. So
Mhm.
they're like, "Oh, you're not into that devil worship, are you?"
Yeah.
So yeah, I get it. I hear you.
Because there's actually, so I live in Baltimore, and there's actually like a witchcraft store here in Baltimore, and it's
That's
very
nice.
underground. And I found it right, and I contacted the owner because I was like, I like doing walkthrough videos, anything horror, anything dark, right? And
Yeah.
I wanted to do a walkthrough video, and they were like, no, because I think they thought that I was gonna put some kind of negative spin
Oh, I get it.
on the store. But I was like, no, I want to embrace it because I mean, I embrace everything dark, everything horror in my channel. Whether it be haunted attractions to horror movies and horror books. So, I mean,
Right.
but I thought that would have been an excellent video.
Maybe too, it was an association with horror. Um, because I know some people who practice at least modern witchcraft might like dislike that label, like
Sure.
because they
Yeah.
would associate what they're doing with something positive and light, and maybe and even unintentionally, maybe just saying the word horror or dark or something like that, maybe they got the wrong idea. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But do you think I also thought too? Could have been also because I was a man and that witchcraft is usually labeled to women.
I don't know because I mean, for me, and I'm so I guess for a little bit of background, I'm a librarian. That's my like professional day job.
Hmm.
And I also teach creative writing. So I consider myself to be someone who's constantly in the pursuit of knowledge. So for me, it's like anybody who wants to learn, come on. I don't care who you are, where you're from, what you've done, what you've been through. I mean, our experiences shape us clearly. But if you're someone who just wants to learn, if you're curious, if you just want to know about something, I'm like, come on for the ride.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, like, it may be like they may have some preconceived notions about the space and cleansing and energy, things like that, just depending on who they are and how they vibe. um but I know for me personally, like I'm not a practicing witch or anything. I dabbled when I was a teenager, but these days, I don't. But for me, I think it would be one of those things where if you want to learn, if you're curious, come on in, let's show you what we got.
That's
Because again, I'm all about learning and growing as a person. So
And one thing about your title that really draws me in and probably draws a lot of people in, it is the Trailer Park Witches. I mean, that is
Yeah.
a interesting concept.
I am glad you mentioned that. I get a lot of attention for that, because it's different enough, I think, um, because it was important to me that my setting show sort of like desperation, poverty. Because I'm from the South, I think you get some stereotypes about the kinds of people who are there and the kinds of people who live in these places. And some of the stereotypes are based in reality, and some of them aren't necessarily so. Like you get your hillbilly cannibals and stuff like that. But I wanted to take a slightly more nuanced approach to these people. I want good people, I want bad people, just regular people, people who are struggling to survive. And sometimes it's might be because of things that they've done, but other times it might just be they're just down on their luck for whatever reason. And I felt like a trailer park, because I've seen firsthand life that way, just the way that like the daily struggle to survive can kind of eat at you, and how some people are just so desperate to escape that and to get away from that and to find something better that they might turn to something dark or malevolent, even if that's not normally who they are, because desperation pushes us. It pushes everyone. And so I really wanted to capture that, and just thought that the trailer park was probably just one of the best ways to do that, to show that like struggle.
And I agree with you. Poverty is one of the things that when people who are in poverty, they definitely they seek acceptance from somewhere, something to give them a bright light. It could be religion, cult, which I attach them to the same, witchcraft. It could be many of things.
Yeah, that's right. And again, like just the struggle is very interesting to me. And I knew I wanted these girls to be, girls who were desperate, girls who, have exhausted their possibilities, and I wanted the struggle. And I wanted to bring to light people who live in these situations, because again you get a lot of unique struggles, I think, to people who live poor in the South. These rural areas where you have a lot of drug use, you have a lot of overdose now, like you see like a ton of this kind of thing, and it's, I think, all rooted in similar things, like this desperation, this lack of choices. If you don't have any kind of economic ability to rise up or to pull yourself out of that space, you're more likely to give in to despair. And for some people, that does look like addiction. For some people, it looks like suicide. They're, sorry, trigger warning, I
Domestic
guess.
violence, yeah, domestic violence or all that.
Exactly. Because it does lead to other things like anger, which, like you said, can lead to, abuse of, people in your household, things like that. So I think for me, like kind of exploring those issues was an important part of that. And it served a good contrast, because this book has haves and have nots, because we have a group of older witches who have had all their dreams come true. They've been able to escape the trailer park and have money and make a name for themselves, for the ones that wanted to. They've been able to shape their lives on their terms by using witchcraft. So you get to see where they are, when the magic runs out for them, like what they've done with the magic, and how, did it really solve all their problems? Like, did it really, like, are they really better off at the end of
Or
the
was it
book?
a band-aid? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a nice kind of, I think, bend in the story too, to have that, to be able to contrast like these desperate girls in the trailer park, like even though they seem very poor off and they have very little, like is it worth that trade-off to have more but to become what these older women who used magic have become, if that makes sense.
Now, do you, as an author, I talk to a lot of authors, and they say that they pour a lot of themselves into their work. Is that something that you did? Do you feel like some of the characters come from past stories that from your history, or
In ways, yeah. So I think the so this book follows two main characters. The main protagonist, the point of view characters you get are an older woman named Loretta who is dying of cancer, and then you get a younger, like, teenage Courtney. And I think that Courtney has a lot of similarities to me at that age. I think she shares a lot of the anger and frustration that I felt at that age, and I think I channeled a lot of that into it. And the other thing that I really channeled into it is, like I said, that movie, The Craft, that I so loved. When I watched that movie for the first time, there's the character, if you've ever seen the movie, the character Nancy Downs. She's the very goth one with the short hair who's kind of the bad girl.
Yes.
I was just fascinated by her when I watched this movie, because she was so different from what, growing up religious in the South, what we're taught like girls and women should be, right? You should be submissive, you should be polite, you should kind of be quiet and reserved, and we're just taught all these things. And I feel like I grew up just learning to almost apologize for existing, you know what I mean? Like, just apologize for taking up space, for all these things. And Nancy was very unapologetically in your face, aggressive, loud, angry, all these things that, I knew that I couldn't be or shouldn't be in that time. And as I got older, the fascination that I had for that character, I kind of idealized her in ways, and I thought, what would it be like to love somebody like that? You know what I mean? Like, because she wasn't all good and she wasn't all bad. Like, she was kind of a mixed bag. Like, she became, during the course of the story, of course, she had an arc where she became darker, but she didn't necessarily start out that way. And I just always had this, what would it be like, to try and befriend someone, to try and love someone who had that darkness inside them, who had that anger, and like they weren't afraid to show it and vent it and live that truth. And I think that a lot of my building of Courtney's storyline kind of revolved around those questions. So putting like 13, 14-year-old Holly in the shoes of this character trying to love someone like Nancy Downs, if that makes sense.
Yes. Now, with that movie, I mean, that movie definitely had a lot of, I mean, I'm not a teenage girl, but it spoke to a lot of teenage girls, what it dealt with, popularity, standing out, race. There was a lot of different aspects, that spoke to a lot of, American, I wouldn't say American, teenage girls all throughout the country, or even women who were teenage girls at one point.
True.
Now, who would you say your target audience is for the book?
I mean, really, I'd like to say anybody, but I think I wrote this book for me. They say to write the book that you most want to read, and this is what I want to read. When I go to the bookshelf and I look for what I want to read next, there's a combination of things I typically look for. So when I say me, I would say probably a woman who identifies as somewhere either Gen X or older millennial, who grew up, because there are a lot of 90s cultural references in here. It's not set in the 90s, but you have a lot of references to the past story, which happened in the 90s. And book 2 is actually set in the 90s, because book 2 is a prequel for this book. Okay. So there's a lot of that kind of thing in there. So I think people who would enjoy those sorts of things are the people who would like this book. I do think that there is broader appeal for it. I think anyone who's looking for more queer representation, because most of the characters in this book are some shade of queer. One of the main characters is bisexual. One of the main characters is lesbian. But there are, because I loved reading books like, Stephen King's It, Boy's Life, things like Dan Simmons' Summer of Night, like all these like coming of age kind of stories. But I wanted something with a little more female representation and some gay representation too, because I feel like those are areas where the horror genre is just starting to grow. I feel like those are areas where, people are just starting to publish more. We're starting to read more. So anybody who's curious about those experiences could pick this up and I think enjoy it. Anybody who likes witchy books, but maybe not too much on the romance side. I know when I look on the bookshelves at witchy books, a lot of them are like cute witchy romances and things like that. I think there's a couple of really big ones, and there's nothing wrong with that. But some people want their witches darker. They want their witches horror-y. So for those people, I think they're the people that I'm looking for.
Awesome. Now, is it hard as a woman writer, author, to not go the direction of the easy way, which is the norm, which is that cute witch romantic novel story that like is stereotypical witch story?
I mean, for me, yes, because I'm a horror girl at heart. Like, I have read the cute witchy stories, like several of them, and I do enjoy them. But I'm a mood reader, so I need to be in a mood. Like, if I'm in a mood, like I just want something light and cute. Most of the time, I want something that's going to thrill me, like something I'm going to open and from like the first page, I'm going to be entertained. That's kind of the thing I look for, and I like horror, but I like horror that not necessarily like extreme, like too terribly extreme. I like stuff that has kind of a heart to it, has kind of a message. And again, that's kind of what I wanted to do here. Like, it was important to have those horror elements in here, though, because I'm a horror girl. Like, that's what I read. Like, I do read some fantasy. I do read a little bit of sci-fi and stuff. But for the most part, like, my heart belongs to horror. So I don't think I could have made this anything other than what it, came out as. Like, I don't think I could write a happy romance story. I'm pretty sure somebody would die.
because that's definitely the safe route to go. You know what I mean?
I think if I wanted to be like on the New York Times bestseller list, like, it would just be cutesy, like, love spell, and it worked out, surprise. But yeah, I like my females angry and angsty. So I don't know how well it would have worked out as a romance. Although there is sort of a romantic subplot in here. I mean, you do have like some unrequited love. You have like the one main character has a crush. She makes it very obvious. So I mean, there are like romantic bits, but it's more about longing, than it is about like a romantic connection, if that makes sense.
Yes. Now, when it comes to submitting your work to publishers, I know you're working with great guys over Psychotoxin Press. Now, do they have, when you submit your work, do they say, hey, let's go to this cute little romantic way, or do they respect your work for what it is?
So that's a great question, because so this book in particular is published through Erie River Publishing.
Okay.
And so when I originally wrote it and submitted it, I had a conversation with the publisher, and she had asked, she said, what do you want this to be? Like, do you want this to be fantasy? Do you want this to be, horror? And I'm like, well, I want it to be horror, because she said, there's an argument that you could make that this could be dark fantasy. And I said, no, I would rather it have the horror label than the dark fantasy label. And she said, okay. She said, do you want it to be YA or do you want it to be adult? And because when she got the original draft, it was borderline. Like, it was on the fence. Like, it could be YA dark fantasy, or it could be adult horror, or it could be YA horror. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, there were many labels that could have applied. And so I spoke to my co-author and I said, it's important for me that this is considered horror. Like, because I want my sort of name to be associated as a horror author, not as a fantasy author. This is something that's important to me. And my co-author agreed. And so we went back to the publisher and we said, we would like this to be adult horror. And the publisher said, okay, in that case, you need to go a little darker. And so we went in when we did our last revision, and we upped some of the violence. We upped some of the scenes of brutality. There were a couple of things where we hadn't really zoomed in on a couple of moments. We had just kind of like, I don't want to say glossed over because I think it's too neat.
Hmm.
But we had like deaths that didn't happen on screen, that weren't like, played out. Like you come across a body, but you don't see them die, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
And so in order to have our publisher fully want to like put this on the adult horror label, we actually needed to go darker. So yeah, instead of the foofy romance, like pushing it that way, which, I mean, if we had said, let's do YA fantasy, that may have been the answer. The
Hmm.
answer might have been, well, if you want it to be YA fantasy, you need to take this back, pull back here, pull back here. But because we wanted it to be adult horror, it was like, no, lean in a little more to the horror, make it a little darker. So we pushed ourselves on that. But I think, quite honestly, I do think it made it a better book, though. So I'm not mad about it.
That's good. That's good. Yeah, because I mean, I always wonder that, like, I guess it's good to have a good publisher to guide you.
Yeah.
Hey, if this is your ultimate goal, to make it a little bit darker or make it a little bit lighter, what
Right.
is your ultimate goal? So, I mean, that's an amazing thing.
And yeah, and it was nice to have that conversation and to be in control of that conversation. It wasn't like you need to do this and you need to do this and you need to do this. It was what is your vision for this book? Like, what do you want it to be? And then let's get it there. Like, here's what we need to do to get it where you want it to be. And for me, that's a sign of, working with good people, when they don't necessarily push their creative vision off onto you. They listen to you and they help you build what you came to build. That's a really important relationship.
So, what's some advice you could give to a young woman author, horror authors out there about to start her first book?
About to start the first book?
Well, yeah.
All right.
About to
Well, if
start.
you're about to start the book, I'd say, everybody's writing process is different. And don't compare yourself to other people. Whether you're drafting, if you go online, you'll see writing advice that says you have to write so many words every day, or you have to write every single day, or you have to do this, you have to do this, you have to do this. And all of it's bullshit. Like, I mean, what works for me isn't going to work for you. What works for you isn't going to work for me. So my biggest thing is, it's only going to get written if you sit down and write it. And you need to find out what that process is for you. Like, can you write every day? Do you want to? Is that something you can do? If it is, great, do it. If it's not, don't give up and say, I'm never going to be a writer because I can't write every day. Because that is the biggest, I think, lie that we tell ourselves, is that you have to do X, Y, and Z to be a writer. And it's not true. All you have to do to be a writer is to write. So make it work for you, even if you have to sit in 15 minutes, increments, and write at 15 minutes at your lunch break, or dictate something into your phone while you're walking, or while you're, walking the dogs or doing chores or whatever it is. If you really want to do it, you'll find, some way to make it work for you, but don't get hung up on it. Don't compare yourself to other people. Don't go on Twitter and see, oh, I got, 5 novels coming
Yeah.
out next year and 10 short stories, and oh, in my collection, and I just signed a contract. Don't do that to yourself,
Mhm.
because we're all different people who work at different paces. Some authors put out multiple releases, multiple stories a year, and good for them, that they can do that. But there are other authors who are just as good, just as talented, just as well known and renowned, who put out one book a year, one book every 2 years, one book every 3 years. You want to focus on the quality of what you're doing and not the quantity. You
Mhm.
want to focus on yourself and your goals, and don't make other people's goals your goals. Say, I want to finish a draft of my novel by 2024, and then do that. And don't, get caught up on, I'm not doing enough. It's not fast enough. And I say this as if I could go back and talk to myself when I began my own writing journey, because I write very slowly. I'm not a fast writer. My drafts come out painfully slow. And I've come now that I'm at peace with that. But when I first started writing, I was like, oh man, I'm never going to make it as a writer if I can't put out, more words. And it took a while to slowly be like, no, Holly, it's not about the number of words. It's about, the quality of words. And if you put out a good enough book, you don't need 10 books in 1 year to have your name out there. If you put out one good book, people are going to find it and they're going to read it and they're going to share it. And that's how you build your name and your reputation, not by putting out a ton of things, but by putting out quality things.
I 100% agree. I mean,
Yay.
I mean, even as a YouTube creator, I always, at one time it was like quantity. I'm like, yeah, those get quite a few views, but people don't come back. Compared to the quality, it may not get as many views, but the people who do view it, they come back and they rewatch.
Yeah. Yep. And then they'll go back and look at your other stuff that you've done, because Correct. I've done that. Like when I've discovered YouTubers and things that I've loved, like there are some booktubers that I watch, and they're not the ones that are putting out videos like, necessarily like, 5 days a week or whatever, but they're the ones who the content is just content that I like. So, I'll go back and like binge watch like their whole catalog.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's kind of the same thing. I hope that translates to reading too, that if somebody like picks this up and they love it, then maybe they'll go back and they'll read my novella. Yep. Yeah. Or maybe, like they'll put the next one on their TBR, because they're like, well, I really liked this and I like this author, so I'll keep my eye open. And then for me, it's important that the things I do have there are, good as well, or very solid, because I don't want them to think, oh, well, that book was good, but the other one sucked, so maybe this is just a one-off.
All right, so we're going to shoot over to the fun part of the interview. You ready? I'm going to ask you 3 harder questions.
Okay.
All right. The first one, who is your favorite witch? Come from a movie, TV show.
I think I already answered Nancy, so I have to stay with my girl Nancy. She taught me that it was okay to be an angry woman. So I think I have to say Nancy Downs from The Craft. Though if I could do a number 2, I think it would be Winifred Sanderson from Hocus Pocus. Oh. Because I love that movie and I watch it every year at Halloween. That's like my comfort Halloween movie.
I can't think of the character's name, but Angela Bassett from American Horror Story Coven. That was.
Oh God, yes! Oh my God, she's amazing. And that was such a great season of that show.
That's the only season that I actually watched it all the way through.
Oh, she was amazing in that, and like, and I think, like her and I can't remember the blondes. She was so good in that season too.
But even whatchamacallit was good into. I can't even think of her name. The lady from Misery. Jesus.
Kathy Bates.
Kathy Bates was amazing in that season. Yeah.
She's always amazing. Like I was always joking that if someone made a movie of my life, who would I want to play me? And I'm like Kathy Bates. Yeah, that's who I want to act as me.
Number 2. What is your favorite? Okay, outside The Craft.
Okay.
What is your favorite witch movie?
I mentioned Hocus Pocus.
Okay.
So I think Hocus Pocus, but that's like a happy comfort movie.
Mm-hmm.
I also liked.
The second one was a letdown.
I haven't watched that one.
Okay, well.
I read the novelization of it because I do book reviews from time to time, and I think I ended up getting an arc of that for review, and it wasn't. I don't know, like it just wasn't as good as I hoped it would be, I think. So I didn't bother seeing the second film because it just didn't. And I guess it's funny because we talked about like the romantic happy movies, but I like the movie Practical Magic with Sandra Bullock and Nicole Kidman. I like the movie. So this is one weird instance in which I like the movie better than the book, because I think that the book had a little more like meandering and things like that, whereas I think the movie did a better job because it had to be condensed of playing up the horror. So I don't want to do spoilers, but I think just a brief synopsis is there's these 2 sisters and they're witches, and their parents die and they go and they live with their aunts, and one of them moves away. She gets a boyfriend, he abuses her, and they end up killing him. And then they're like, oh, what do we do with the body? So they're trying to like resurrect him from the dead, and hijinks happen. And I think that in the movie it's darker than the book is. So I don't think it qualifies necessarily as horror, but it is a good atmospheric, witchy movie that I love to watch from time to time, because I do think that the movie is darker than the book. And then I'll throw out A24's The Witch, because
Which, yes,
Black Phillip
yeah,
is everything.
yeah.
And I want to live deliciously. Okay.
Because there hasn't been that many dark witch movies, and The Witch, I mean, is one that definitely stands out.
I loved that movie. I when I finished watching it the first time, I immediately rewatched it, just because, like I said, with the atmosphere, and like Black Phillip freaked me right the F out. Like, I was like, holy,
Yeah.
this is insane. But I also loved it. So yeah. Those are my top choices. There you go. And you get an eclectic variety from me.
All right. Last question. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
You're thinking
Horror
about this one.
movies. Horror movies. So I was about to ask you which witch you would be, but I feel like it's from Craft. If you had to be one, yeah, I think it'd be different. All right. Who is your favorite final girl from any horror movie?
Sidney Prescott.
Sydney's a good one, by the way. Sidney Prescott, I mean, yes,
Yeah.
she's in the top 3.
Yeah. I don't know if it's just like how old I was when those movies came out, because like in the 90s, I think we got some really good like horror, like some really good entries into the horror movie genre. Like, there was a lot of teen slashers that were coming out like in the mid 90s and such. But Scream was one of the first horror movies I had watched, in that I just loved it. Like, and I do from time to time rewatch the original Scream movie, because I love the meta aspect of it, like how self-aware it is, and I find like it doesn't dumb down the story. It's very tongue in cheek, and it's kind of like, hey, this is what I am,
Yes.
and I don't know why, but that really pulled me in. Prior to that, I had not ever seen any of the Nightmare movies, or any of the Halloween movies, or anything like that. I didn't feel compelled to watch them. I did watch some horror, but not those types of movies. And I think Scream was the first one where I watched it and I was like, okay, I get it. And there was actually a short-lived TV series from MTV, I think, that was Scream.
Mm-hmm.
And I even liked that, that little TV series, because you have this one character who's kind of like the narrator character who Randy would be in the original Scream, and he's walking you through and he's saying, you're not here because you care about the horror. You're here because, you care about who's going to win the big game on Friday, and you care about who's going to go to the homecoming dance with so-and-so. You know what I mean? And for me, like, when he's narrating this, I'm like, oh my God, like, this is teaching me things about, how to write, because he's right. You've got to get the reader or viewer to care.
You have to.
So yeah, all these things I think is Scream, and then Sidney Prescott, and Neve Campbell is a goddess. I mean, this woman is everything.
So, and she grows on you too. Sidney Prescott grows on you with each movie. Like,
yeah.
Like, for the first one, I was like, oh, okay. But by the time you get to the 5th movie, you're like, I love Sidney Prescott. She is like iconic. Like, you see her grow with each movie.
Yeah.
So, and she's definitely in the top.
I haven't seen the most recent one yet, so
don't spoil me. It's the best movie it's the second best horror movie of 2023.
What would you say is the best?
Talk to me.
I saw that. I actually recently watched that and I loved it. So I'm glad to know that you think it's the best.
Yes. Okay. So I'm doing my ranking myself, but right now top 3 is Talk to Me, Scream 6, Evil Dead Rises.
I haven't watched that one either.
It's great.
I am woefully lacking in the horror this year in the movies.
Well, last year was amazing for horror movies. This year, there's some good ones. I mean, it's easy for me. Last 2 years, it's easy for me to pump out a top 10 quick off the top of my head without pausing and thinking. So, I mean, there's been quite a few good horror movies. And so there's been a lot of horror movies that surprised me because I thought they were going to be awful. And like Saw X, I thought it was going to be awful. And it was amazing.
See, I couldn't do the Saw movies. I think I watched the first one, and I tried to watch other ones, but I can't. Like, there's something about the like visceral, like I just couldn't. Like, I just physically like felt like, you know what I mean? Like,
Saw X is tough to watch, but it is definitely, if it's not the best Saw movie, it's right below Part 1, the original. Like, it's that good. And I hate Saw movies. You ask anybody, I hate the Saw franchise.
I'm glad I'm not alone in that. Like, I
thought it was a bunch of garbage, and I think after Part 2, it just got horrible. But then, like, I went into seeing Saw X thinking that I was gonna hate it, and I was completely shocked. I was like,
okay, so let me turn the tables on you and ask you a question if you don't mind.
Go ahead, shoot.
So, what would you say are your top like 3 to 5 horror movies of all time?
All time.
Oh yeah, all time.
Okay, I'm not gonna put them in a ranking order.
No, that's fine.
I'm not gonna put them in ranking order, but Halloween, 1978, the original.
Okay.
And this is a brand new one. This came out last year, but I'm tossing it in the mix. X. I love X. Well, I'm gonna say X/Pearl, though, because they go hand in hand. Third one, I'm gonna say John Carpenter's The Thing. See, if I say the last two, it's gonna piss people off. But
controversial opinion time.
Train to Busan, which is the Korean zombie movie, which I think is the best zombie movie ever made. That's gonna piss a lot of people off. And one last one, Henry, A Portrait of a Serial Killer.
Okay, so I had to write some of those down because I haven't heard of them. So now I have like a to be watch list. So
you're gonna love. By the way, I say this in every damn video. X and Pearl, please watch them. Maxine's coming out next year. It is the greatest horror trilogy ever. I mean, it is. I mean, it might be the greatest. The movies are so and it sucks because they don't get a lot of attention. And Mia Goth, the lead actress in both of them, Oscar award, worthy performances, and especially Pearl. Pearl is, you just got to watch them. Everybody I tell watch them, they always message me. Thank you for telling me that was the greatest thing ever.
All right, I will definitely watch them because, like I said, I'm always on the lookout for a good horror movie. I don't watch a lot. Like, I'm not one of these people who can like just sit and watch like a ton of them, even if they're garbage. Like, if I watch a horror movie, I want it to be an excellent horror movie. So I tend to like do my research and look at reviews and listen to people's recommendations, because if I watch a horror movie, like, I want it to be a really good horror movie.
Another one that gets no attention, Mandy, starring Nicolas Cage. Mandy. It is it's an absolute indie masterpiece. I mean, it's an acid trip, but it's beautiful. I mean, the lights, the shades, the colors, the fucking story. It has one of the most evil villains you ever see, and like to see, it's such a rewarding movie because, like, I always say, like, when it comes to horror books or movies, character development is the most important thing. I love that. You have to hate the main character. You either have to hate him or you like him. You know what I mean? You'd be like, okay, I agree why he's doing these bad things, or I fucking hate him. When it comes to the victims, you gotta fucking like or hate them. You can't just not feel nothing about them. And I saw a recent movie. I'm not going to tell you where because it's literally out in the movie theaters right now. But I didn't give a fuck about the characters. Like the villain was amazing, the kills was amazing, but I literally didn't feel one way or other about the characters dying in terrible ways. I just didn't feel anything about it. Like, And like
Yeah.
I feel a horror movie, I gotta feel something. You know, I gotta either feel yes, killed him, or oh man, not him. I liked him.
You see, I feel the same way about books too, because
Yes.
so when I started reading, and I've been a reader all my life, but like, I used to be under this illusion that I needed to finish every book I started. Like, I was like, I'm a completionist, I have to finish it. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, no, life is too short for me to read bad books. My TBR list is going to outlast me. It will live longer than I do. They're gonna have to carve that shit on my tombstone because it's just gonna be there. So I'm like, I'm more choosy now about like what I watch and what I read, about how I spend my time. Because I think when you're younger, you just feel like time is infinite. That you have all the time in the world. But when you start getting older, you start to realize, no, I only read 50 books a year, so I have to be picky with what those books are going to be, and I'm not going to read hot garbage.
Yeah.
And like you said with the characters, that is the main thing that makes me DNF a book. If I pick it up and I read it and I'm like 50, 100 pages in and I don't give a shit about the characters,
There-
I'm very likely to just put that book on the shelf and be like, you know what, I don't have time for this. Like, I don't want to read about these people. I don't care if they die. I don't care if they live. I don't care. And for me, that's the one trigger. Like, if that, I will DNF a book like that. If I'm so many pages in and I don't feel any kind of emotional attachment or connection and don't care either way, I'm like, why would I read it if I don't care?
because people want to kill me for saying this. I think the original. I mean, I think the reboot of Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the reboot of Friday the 13th are better than any of the originals
Okay.
because character development. In the Friday the 13th, I hated the fucking characters. Yes, the characters was annoying, but I cared about. But I'll say 50% of them were annoying. I was like, please kill them. Thank you, Jason. The other ones, I felt bad for them. Like I felt bad for the little Asian stoner and the black jock guy. I felt bad for them because they were likable characters.
Right.
And even in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre reboot, like you got to know the characters a little bit. You got to know that somebody's going to college, somebody is going to get married, this and that. It's not just a Terrifier movie where.
So I'm going to pull you back full circle to the conversation about Scream, where he's walking us through the hall and he says, you're here because you care about what happens to this guy.
Exactly.
You care about...
Exactly.
So there, you've just proven his point.
Exactly. Like even the Scream movies do a great job because you care about the fucking characters.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was rooting for Randy. I didn't want Randy to die.
Yes. You care about the characters, and like I feel like horror authors and filmmakers need to like know that, character development. I'm a watcher, I'm a reader, I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm on the outside. I'm the person you're making this stuff for, and like I'm telling you, like character development in the 80s, it didn't matter.
Right.
But I'm telling you, but our palates have become, as horror fans, have become more intelligent, and like we need a little bit more than just constant bodies getting racked up.
Yeah, and I mean, as someone who teaches creative writing, I get a lot of students who talk about character-driven versus plot-driven stories, and usually the things that I say to them is that now in modern literature, those lines really start to blur because you don't pick up a fantasy and just assume it's going to be shallow, actiony, like all plot and no development. Like people want both. They want to see how the plot changes the character, how the character reacts and acts and grows and changes within the confines of the story and the plot and your narrative arc. So I think it speaks to what you're saying, that we're more mature, like as viewers or I don't know, as people who consume media, because it's not just books, it's movies too. But you're absolutely spot on. I think that we care about character development. I think that's why some things like some of the A24 films do a pretty good job, because I think that they can make you invest in the characters, love them or hate them. And I think Jordan Peele, like he does that well with his movies, that you start to care about these people, and that's why we're seeing, like, I think this renaissance of horror that where we're getting like this heavily character driven. And I see in fantasy and other speculative fiction too, but I just speak on horror because that's where I spend most of my time.
Yeah. It's great. I mean, listen, I like to relate to whoever I'm watching on TV. I like to relate to them. And how am I relate to someone or put myself in their shoes if I don't know anything fucking about them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, listen, Holly, please tell everyone where they can find you.
So my website is hollycornetto.com. On my website, you can find links to my social media of your choice. So if you're on X, if you're on Blue Sky, if you're on Threads, wherever you're at, Instagram, Facebook. I do spend a lot of time on Facebook in several horror groups. There's an excellent Facebook horror group called Books of Horror. I spend a lot of time chatting books in there. So if you're a horror fan, check them out because it's a really great group of people who it is readers, it's writers, it's a ton of people, and we chat books. So you can find me Facebook, you can find me Instagram, Twitter, wherever you are, I'm probably there too. My books are available online. There are links to them on my website. You can find them on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. Or if you would like a signed copy of any of my books, you can get in touch with me directly because I can ship signed books to you, and it won't cost you any more than it would to order it at Amazon. So.
Oh wow, nice.
Do that.
Holly, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this. This was fun.
Good. I'm sorry I go off and rant, but
I like
right?
that.
That
I
makes
like
it
it's much better than being
right?
scripted because then you can have real conversations with people.
Yes, I don't do a script. But it's been a pleasure. Everybody, please go out and go on Amazon, Goodreads, anywhere you can buy books and get They Are Cursed Like You. Yes.
Look at the cover. It's beautiful. Don't you want to read?
Beautiful color. I mean, you got a witch standing on a trailer.
That's right. You really want to read this. I promise.
So check it out. And check out Holly on social media. She said Threads and Bluefin. I have no idea what those are, but check them out. I'm showing my age.
I got to get you on Threads and Blue Sky.
Blue Sky. What's Blue Sky?
It's basically new Twitter, I think. So it's like Twitter. The guy who built it originally, I think Jack Dorsey, is that his name? He developed Blue Sky. So it's very similar. Like everything that you can do on Twitter, you can do on Blue Sky. And Threads is pretty similar too. But Threads is owned by the same people who have Instagram and Facebook. So the one good thing about Threads is that it connects all your accounts. So you get like Threads feeds in your Instagram. So it's kind of neat. So.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to definitely jump up on my social media game soon because there's so much stuff out there that I don't know about. All right. Everyone, thank you for coming to the Horror Room. I'm Travis Bruce. Please, by the way, hit that like and that subscribe button so you can keep in touch with all my interviews. I post videos daily, so let's not lose track. All right, guys, thank you for coming. I'll see you guys next time. Take care.